The good old fruit bowl painting and naked people sketches, that kind of stuff? Yeah, no. That's references. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Digital Drawcast, the podcast where I talk about all things digital art related and try to teach you some of the tips and tricks I've picked up over the years. This is episode 2 of the Digital Drawcast, and in this episode we're going to be covering topics such as how to use reference pictures for sketching in color and how to make something look like it's glowing, as well as using the multiply layer to create shadows. If you haven't seen the first episode, that's okay. It is not a requirement to view these episodes in order to understand what is going on. I will make references to layers in this episode, although it is a pretty simple concept, and I'll go over it briefly when we get to that point. But we have a lot to talk about this episode, so let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, to start off, I want to talk about something very important to art of any kind, and that's using references. Tip number 1, use references. Next to drawing often and practicing, this is up there on the list of important things to know when learning how to draw. References give you guidelines and a more solid idea of how something looks, so you can draw it better. For instance, I found reference images online for different kinds of mushrooms for this image. I also found references for the glass orb at the end of the mouse's staff. You may be thinking that references are like cheating because only true artists draw everything from their mind and pure imagination. Yeah, no, that's a good way to never learn how to draw anything. In fact, there's a whole category of art called still life where it's exclusively drawing and painting from a real-world reference. The good old fruit bowl painting and naked people sketches, that kind of stuff? Yeah, no, that's references. No one can completely mentally visualize every physical object that ever existed, even if it's something familiar to you, like mushrooms, for example. Now, in my head, I can picture a typical mushroom, kind of round, squat, conical top with a stem. Maybe make it like the Mario variety with the red and white spots. But that type of mushroom doesn't really fit this scene. And it's also not that unique or interesting. Everybody knows what a Mario mushroom looks like. So, I looked up some mushroom pictures online and found these really cool looking ones with stripes that look more like shells. I think they look like clam shells, and they're growing off the sides of trees. I thought that looked super cool, so I wanted to include those in the picture. I also found some mushrooms that kind of had a similar shape to the classic mushroom, but they had like freckly patterns, like really light freckle patterns on them. And they grew in all sorts of sizes and in these large clusters, and I really liked how it looked. So I decided to include those in my picture. And I think they made for a much more interesting composition than if I were to go with just the standard Mario mushroom. Another thing that references are good for, that I feel like doesn't get mentioned a lot, is color reference. It's exactly what it sounds like. You use an image with a color scheme you really like and you try to emulate it. This is especially good to use if you're not very confident in your skills to select colors that pair well together. It can also help you branch out of your color comfort zone. For me, I definitely have a comfort zone. I noticed that I tended towards using light pinks, blues, and teal. That kind of color combo, I really like the way it looks. So for this one, I wanted to try something a little different. So I looked for some color palettes online, and I found an image of a neon lit city at night that was predominantly purples and really dark blues, with just a hint of pink. And for not having worked with purple hardly at all, I think this picture turned out pretty good, but that's only because I used that color palette reference to help me out. Now, with the color reference images, you'll need to import the physical image like with standard reference images, you can just have the picture pulled up on the internet and look back to it. But with color images, you'll really want to import them into your scene onto a separate layer, so you can use your color select tool and sample those colors rather than just eyeballing it and kind of guessing what color it is. You'd be surprised how often you'll look at a picture and think, yeah, it kind of looks like a brown, and you find out it's actually a red or something like that. So it's really good to just have a color sample ready. Okay, but that's it for tip number 1. Let's go ahead and actually talk about what it is I'm drawing. I kind of gave you a little bit of description of it already. So this image is called Deep in the Night, and it's kind of similar to Little Traveler in that you have a little creature and they're going kind of on an adventure. But this one, in my mind, it's more of this mouse is daring to wander out during the night, and all they have is their little glowy staff with them. Maybe they're up to no good. Maybe they're doing some mischief. Maybe they're in a cult. I don't know. But regardless, they are out, about, and they be cute. So again, the colors that I used predominantly for this image were purple and blue, which for night scenes specifically, most of the time you're going to get really deep blues and purples, which is actually, a lot of people don't know that. Some people think, oh, it's nighttime, it's dark, so you're going to use blacks and grays. I mean, sometimes, sure, but actually there's a lot of color in the night, and a lot of times everything is just kind of given a blue tint rather than just pure black and gray shadow. So that's something to keep in mind if you ever decide to do a night scene, is that really look at some of those reference pictures. Look at some reference pictures. You'll notice that there's actually color in the dark. But make sure if you do a night scene, don't make it too dark. Add some sort of lighting in it. You want to have some contrast. And for me, my light source was actually the glass orb at the end of the mouse's staff. It is, I think I kind of, in my mind, I have it, so it's like a little glass orb that holds like little fireflies in it, you know? And that created some really nice, it had a really nice glow effect, and it cast some really nice shadows. So actually, I'm going to talk about how I created that glow effect, because it's surprisingly easy. You may not believe me, but it's actually very easy to pull off, and I want to share how I do it. So that's tip number 2. We're going to go over how to create a glow effect. Okay, this is where I'm going to talk about layers, specifically layer types. If you missed the last episode, layers are kind of like panes of glass stacked on top of each other, and you can draw on each of those panes of glass. And when you stack them up, you get the full picture. But if you accidentally mess up one of those glass panes, it doesn't affect the other ones. So you can have your line art on one layer and your color on another. And if you mess up your line art, your color is still okay. It's not affected. So that's the idea of layers. Now, layers also have types. So by default, whenever you create a new layer, it's set to normal. But you can change that anytime you want for any given layer. So the layer type I use to create this glow effect is called overlay. Now what overlay does is it makes all of the brush strokes semi-transparent and makes everything you draw over look like it's brighter. It's almost like you're painting with light. It's extremely useful for creating glow effects and little light bulbs and small highlights that aren't just pure white, that actually have some color to them. And it can make your scene really pop. But before doing anything, make sure you save what you're working on. Never forget to save, and create a new layer specifically for the glow and set it to overlay. Don't make your glow effect on your color layer or your line layer, because once you set the layer to overlay, it'll change everything that's on that layer. So create a new layer, set it to overlay. Now you're going to want a really soft round brush. What I mean by that is have a round brush, right? And the edges of it need to be soft edged, not hard edged. So something like an airbrush, that's what I use. And then select a color, something much lighter in tone. but it can have a little color to it, like maybe a light pink or a light yellow, even a light blue, depending on what color you want your light to be. Decrease the size of your brush depending on how big you want the light to be, and we're going to create the center of the light source. So find where you want the light source to be. For me, it's the center of the glass orb. So you're going to draw a little circle where the light source is, and I drew several tiny little circles for the fireflies. And then that's it for that layer. Now you're going to create a second layer on top, also set it to overlay, and increase your brush size. And now you can also change the color as well, not too much. If you chose a light yellow before, make it a little darker yellow. If you chose blue, make it a slightly darker blue, but just slightly. Just increase the saturation a little bit. And now you're going to take your brush, increase its size, and paint over that spot we painted before. And you'll notice instantly that you have a soft little glow around it, and you can make the light appear brighter by just making that painting that second layer a bit bigger, just painting some more space around it, essentially. And that's how you get a really quick light, really fast, and it actually looks pretty good. But it does not end there. You can stop there, but I think, in my personal opinion, it looks a little flat. So what you need to do is you got to make the light feel like it's set into that space. And you do that by having it cast shadows. Now, this goes into shading, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I am going to talk a little bit about, at least to get this glow effect looking like it's actually set into the frame. And that goes into tip number 3, which is using a multiply layer type for shadows. Now, multiply is very similar to overlay. It's another layer type, and it has some transparency to it, but instead of making things lighter, it makes things darker. So this way you can select a color and apply it as a shadow to all of the objects. And it looks pretty good, in my opinion, honestly. For multiply, though, the way I use multiply, I only use it for the hard, dark shadows. I don't use it for some of the more fine detail shading, but it's very good for drawing in some quick, solid shadows with hard edges, and it can make your scene really pop just the way it is, like that. And to make sure that you don't draw outside the lines, just go ahead and grab a selection tool, select the area you want to shade, and draw in that line. Think of it like 3D space. So we're gonna go into the shading a little bit. So for like the mouse head, right? The face of the mouse is close to the light. You have light hitting it. So I'm not gonna draw shadow there. I know it seems kind of obvious, but you gotta get used to this kind of mindset. So the shape of the shadow, the way it's going to fall on the mouse's face and head, is determined by, well, the shape of the head for one, and also the direction the light is coming from. So I drew the shadow on the opposite side, kind of almost like a little crescent. And again, this might seem kind of obvious to some people, but I feel like it's a good thing to go over just in case. Maybe you've never been taught how to do shading actually before, and you've kind of just guessed at this point. Well, there you go. There's a lot more to shading. Again, this is just a quick way to drop in some solid shadow. I don't stop there usually with my shading. I usually go in and add some more fine-tuned details, and for that I don't use the multiply layer. I just use a normal layer, and I go in with a slightly darker color than the base color. But I'll have to save that for another time. I'm going to go ahead and call that good for this episode. We kind of covered a few things. I hope you all enjoyed it, and hope to see you again next episode. But for now, again, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this up. And don't forget that references are your best friend. Okay, goodbye.